I'm Steph Garcia Psychos with D1 Ticker, and I'm joined today by John Canzano. He is a stellar journalist and radio host. You can find his work on johncanzano.com, and he has been digging into the Portland State AD search. We have breaking news that they have announced to hire John Johnson, the new AD at Portland State. John Canzano, thanks for joining us.
You bet. A big fan of what you guys do.
We're a big fan of you, especially with this story. So John Johnson has a pretty lengthy resume. He's been at Nebraska, Washington State, Weber State, Eastern Washington, where he's an alum. He has a strong external background. He has also been an AD before at Weber State, Eastern Washington, and an interim AD at Washington State before current AD Pat Chun was hired. John Canzano, how does John Johnson fit the candidate profile? What Portland State is looking for?
Well, I think it became pretty evident in their search that they were looking for somebody who had experience, who had been a sitting athletic director, and also somebody who had great fundraising experience. And I think the variety of places that Johnson had been, and from his time at Weber State all the way through Washington State, where they under Bill Moose, they really started to raise money and build the football stadium up. And I think all of that sort of played into what Portland State wanted to hear. Portland State has got a football problem. They don't have a stadium that is anywhere near their campus footprint. So they need somebody to come in with some ideas on how that program can conduct football while, navigating and commuting out to Hillsborough, which is, 15 to 25 minute drive from the campus. So they're having a real difficulty getting students out to games. Further, I think, they really did need stability. This is an athletic department that has been told by university administrators that it has to be self-sufficient. They're not going to subsidize the athletic department. You've got a campus that's a commuter campus. It's a tricky little animal, Portland State. So I think they needed somebody who had a little experience. Johnson's age probably works in his benefit here. You get somebody in their 60s who's coming in that has seen some stuff in his career. But it's an interesting time. Portland State badly needs this hire to be right.
Well, you have written about this. You've written about the finalists. Does Johnson have that big sport experience to come in and tackle these challenges that you've mentioned?
It's interesting because I don't think that his time at Nebraska necessarily is going to benefit him at Portland State. I mean, huge differences in those programs. I don't even think Washington State is a great correlation, but I think the hiring committee and the search firm must have looked at his time at Weber State and other places and said, okay, he understands still what it's like to be with the have-nots, right? I mean, this isn't Nebraska where you can make 4 phone calls and raise $20 million. This is not Washington State where you can even, make some phone calls. The support from the donor base here is scattered at Portland State. You've got competition from Oregon and Oregon State right in your own backyard. So I think they were probably looking more at his time in the infancy of his career than they were maybe the last couple of years. And I looked at this search and I had some doubts even late that they might fail the search because I felt like the pool of candidates they got wasn't the best possible pool. But I'm eager to see if John Johnson can fix this thing. It needs attention, and he's really going to be on his own. He's not going to get support from the university administration. Dr. Stephen Piercy hired him, but Piercy doesn't want to have to turn to the academics on campus and say, "Look, we don't have any money. We've given it to athletics." That's just not a refrain that he's comfortable giving right now.
Well, what are the first tasks that Johnson needs to tackle immediately, especially over those first 100 days?
Yeah, they have to figure out, is football part of the future at Portland State? I think it should be. And I think, the study that they did with the collegiate consulting sort of came back and said, look, there's a real risk here if you drop football that you send a message that athletics at the university is done. And, what do you do with men's and women's basketball if you don't have a football program? Are you a member of the Big Sky Conference if that happens? So I know that they looked at Division II, couldn't find, many comparable places for them to play games if they went D2. I know they looked at NAIA. One of the comments that I got back was that, the NAIA presidents are not even going to return the call at Portland State. They don't want Portland State on that level. So it's either D1 or something else. So they have to figure out right away, like, look in the mirror, Portland State. Who are you? Where do you want to go? You've got a great basketball facility. The Viking Pavilion is a great facility, and I think it gives them inherent advantages in the Big Sky. They should be a basketball power. But how does football fit with that? I tend to think football can fit and can work with it. And I agree with the study. You drop football, the message to all your donors is the athletic department's in trouble. We're waving the white flag. You can't afford to do that right now if you're Portland State, because you need that buy-in. You have too many salaries, too many scholarships, too many future football games already under contract that you'd have to buy out of. I don't think they can afford that, but he's got to come in and go, okay, who are we? What do we want to be in this city and in this region? I think that's the first thing in the first 100 days.
Well, I want to note that Johnson has external relations as his background, but also strategic planning. So hopefully that comes into play over these, again, first 100 days of his tenure. How can he work to improve institutional alignment? You mentioned that there is a little bit of a disconnect between university leadership and athletic leadership.
Yeah, and I think right now the feeling on that campus is that Dr. Stephen Piercy is probably not a long-term administrator at Portland State. So you're coming in as an athletic director and you're facing the potential that you're going to be working for someone else in a year or 2 years. So I think that that's an issue there. And maybe some of Johnson's experience really helps him in that way. But you need donor alignment, I think, first and foremost. I mean, I do think there's some donor support out there that just needs to be reinvigorated. And I also think that there's some outreach that he could do on that campus to other corners of the campus, the academics on campus, the students on campus, a lot of international students on campus who have never really been connected to the athletic department. That campus really does feel splintered to me in a lot of ways. And I think, if John Johnson can come in and be the glue guy of this campus, I think he could really galvanize the student body. I think he could galvanize the donor base. But I think there's some rocky days ahead with, who are the administrators, who are you working for, and what is the ultimate direction of the campus?
Big picture, how is Portland State viewed in the region, in the market? As you mentioned, some strong Pac-12, not rivals for Portland State, but for attention in the market.
Yeah, I think it obviously takes a backseat to Oregon and Oregon State. It has struggled to draw for home games for that reason. I actually think the move out to the Hillsborough Stadium, which, as I pointed out, was like 15 miles away from campus, has helped in some ways because you have some suburban families who maybe can't afford to go to an Oregon State game that have sort of adopted the program. The kids at Portland State, the athletes at Portland State, I've worked with some of them up close firsthand. They've volunteered at a summer camp we do for special needs kids. Phenomenal athletes, great stories to tell. There's absolutely a place in college athletics for Portland State and Portland State football. It's just a matter of John Johnson coming in and trying to figure out, okay, how do we get through the next 100 days? What's the plan? How do we view football? But, as it pertains to Oregon and Oregon State, they're never, families have for years voted to go to the Ducks games or go to the Beaver games over the Viking games. It's taken a special coach like Pokey Allen years ago, or maybe even Jerry Glanville, who was hired to real personality to get people to the stadium. I think Bruce Barnum put a pretty decent product on the field last year, but he still was sort of having to work as, like the minor league baseball promotions market. He offered that on my radio show. He said, hey, I'll buy everybody a beer who comes to the game. And suddenly people showed up for a beer, but you can't do that for every game. So I think there's some real challenges there in building brand, connecting with high school kids as part of your program, connecting with families, and finding yourself as an alternative to that experience of driving all the way down I-5 and paying more money, paying to park, paying a seat donation at Autzen Stadium or Reser Stadium, and really trying to connect with fans and with the community.
What does Johnson need to understand about Portland and the uniqueness of Portland? I know that Austin has Keep Austin Weird, but I've been to Portland several times. It is a very unique place. What does he need to know to really tap into this community?
I liked that I saw in his bio that he's got some Northwest connections and his wife has some Northwest connections. That helps him a little bit. But I think that's going to be a big challenge for him because I think outsiders, people who haven't lived here, people who don't know Portland State, they're not really going to understand it for a little while. So I think there's going to be an eye-opening period here for Johnson. I'm sure there are with most AD jobs, but this thing is a tricky animal. And I think that, if we have seen athletic directors before come in and stay for short periods. We've seen others leave out of frustration. Valerie Cleary, who left Portland State, the last AD, it wasn't exactly a stepping stone to go from Portland State to becoming the athletic director of a, Multnomah Athletic Club. Like that wasn't the career path that I'm sure a lot of people expected from that job. So, Portland State needs somebody who's going to commit to it, somebody who's going to understand it, and somebody who's going to come up with a plan, a strategic plan, and see it through. We've seen fundraisers come in here before, and they leave after 16 months. They throw their hands up and say, I can't do this. So it is a tough job. I think it is one of the toughest jobs in college athletics. And I think Johnson just signed on for it.
Well, last big question for you. Yesterday, you were reporting that this hire might be announced, and then you came back and reported that there might be some rocks going on, a rocky movement going on in the negotiations, and that the search might just be scrapped. Do you have any insights onto what happened?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, look at the process here. The president, Stephen Pearcy, first went to Collegiate Consulting, and he spent $30,000 on this study of the athletic department. Then he formed a futures committee, the Athletic Futures Committee, and he said, I'm going to give them the study, and then I'll take recommendations from them. I was worried at that point that any athletic director who wanted to come through the door was going to view that as, well, I'm going to be given my marching orders. I'm not going to be able to come in and come up with my own ideas, my own strategy. You're essentially going to be handed that study, handed the recommendations, and told, okay, here's your job, go execute it. So I was really concerned about the search, finding the right person. Now, as this search went on, they consulted with Turner, search firm. And I know that, the person who ran the search, Turner's son ran the search. It was the first search, I believe, that he has handled by himself. So there were some concerns from people in the industry, like, how is this going to go? Is this the right search for a first timer to conduct? And they ultimately got down to a final 3. I was aware when they got down to 8. I knew who the 8 were, who were their final 8. When they got down to final 3, I really started drilling down on it and looking at who they were actually bringing in. It became evident to me that Johnson was the leader in the clubhouse early. And then it was a matter of, would this negotiation come through, or were they going to have to scrap it? There were some things being negotiated in the 11th hour as it pertains to salary, as it pertains to all the things that ADs usually include as part of their contracts, that I think got a little dicey. And I heard yesterday that they were considering, they were maybe at an impasse, and they were considering failing the search. Thankfully, from Portland State's standpoint, that would have been a disaster. That to start over would have been horrendous for them. They've already sort of taken a public relations hit for the clunkiness of the search and everything that I mentioned before. So I really don't think they could afford to fail this search. And in the end, I think Johnson and Portland State got on the same page. I know he's going to be making about $50,000 more than his predecessor. I don't know if it was totally a financial consideration, but Portland State needed to up that salary. I think they were sitting on the low end of Big Sky Conference athletic director's salary scale. And I think they did come up a little bit on that front. And I know that that was part of the recommendation from Collegiate Consulting. They told them, you're going to have to spend more money if you want to get quality candidates. So it looks like they stepped up to the table at least a little bit.
Well, big things happening for the Vikings. We are looking forward to seeing how John Johnson's tenure starts off and how it goes. John Canzano, thank you so much for joining us today and for doing such diligent reporting on this search throughout the whole process.
Thanks for having me on.